Hello, and a warm welcome to Reddit Echo.
Childhood is a kingdom of its own, governed by the simple laws of imagination and adventure. Rules are suggestions, and danger is a concept that hasn't yet fully taken root in a young mind. When I was about 7 years old, my 2 older brothers and I were citizens of this kingdom. Our favourite domain was a vast, sun-scorched field on the edge of town that served as an unofficial motocross track. It was a paradise of dirt jumps, tyre tracks, and endless possibilities. On one particular afternoon, fueled by the kind of brilliant, ill-conceived logic that only children possess, we decided to become miners. We weren't digging for treasure or fossils. The goal was the tunnel itself, the act of creation. We were going to burrow into the earth, to carve out our own secret subterranean fort. We found a small, sandy embankment that seemed perfect, and with our bare hands and a couple of discarded shovels we'd found, we got to work. The sun beat down on our backs as we dug. We were a machine, a team. One would scoop out loose dirt, another would clear it away. We laughed and joked, our world reduced to the growing hole in the ground. It was hard work, but we were making progress. After a few hours, we had created something that felt monumental to us. A tunnel about 6 feet deep and 2 feet high. It was a dark, cool, earthy-smelling cave, and it was ours. Being the youngest and smallest, I was the designated frontline excavator. I would wiggle my way to the very face of the tunnel, my world shrinking to the circle of damp earth in front of me, and scrape away handfuls of soil, passing them back to my brothers. I remember the feeling of cool, packed earth under my fingernails, the musty scent of the deep soil, and the thrilling sense of being in a place no one else knew existed. I was deep inside, completely absorbed in my task, when I heard a low, groaning sound. It wasn't loud. It was a deep, subterranean sigh, the sound the earth makes when it decides to shift. I froze. For a split second, there was silence. Then, the world ended. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was an instantaneous, violent collapse. The roof of our tunnel gave way with a deafening roar of falling dirt. My world didn't go dark. It was erased. One moment I was in a tunnel, the next I was encased in a solid, suffocating blackness. The first sensation was the weight. It was unimaginable. It felt like a giant had placed its foot on my entire body and was pressing down, slowly and deliberately. I was pinned, completely immobilized, from my head to my toes. I couldn't twitch a finger, couldn't move my legs. I was a statue made of flesh, buried alive. Then came the heat. It wasn't the warmth of the summer sun. This was a deep, radiating, furnace-like heat that seemed to bloom from the very soil encasing me. It was the heat of compression, of a body generating immense energy with nowhere for it to go. I started to sweat instantly, but the sweat had nowhere to evaporate. It just pooled on my skin, adding to the suffocating dampness. Panic is too gentle a word for what I felt. It was a primal, all-consuming terror. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was a frantic, trapped bird slamming against the walls of a tiny cage, my rib cage. I tried to scream, but my lungs had no room to expand. My chest was constricted by the immense pressure. And then my vision began to change. In the absolute blackness, a deep, pulsing red began to bloom. At 7 years old, I didn't understand that this was the physiological result of blood being forced into the capillaries in my eyes and brain under the extreme pressure. My young mind, raised on simple concepts of heaven and hell, arrived at a terrifying conclusion. I was dying, and I was going to hell. The heat, the darkness, the red glow, it all fit. I wasn't just trapped. I was being punished. I was in a grave of my own making, and it was a preview of eternal damnation. Breathing became a battle I was losing. Every time I managed to suck in a tiny, insufficient breath, I inhaled fine, gritty soil. It coated my tongue, my throat, my lungs. I would cough, a violent spasmodic reflex, and the coughing would contract my stomach, forcing out what little air I had. And then, the weight would press down even harder, making it impossible to draw the next breath. I was drowning on dry land, drowning in earth. The cycle was vicious and swift. A tiny gasp, a mouthful of dirt, a suffocating cough, more pressure. My thoughts began to fragment. The initial theological terror was replaced by a more basic, animalistic need: air. I needed to breathe. My brain was screaming for oxygen, and my body was failing to provide it. I don't know how long this lasted. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. In that hot, red, airless void, it was an eternity. The world shrank to the few inches around my face, a tiny prison of dirt and despair. I was giving up. The fight was leaving my body, replaced by a heavy, welcoming numbness. The red began to darken. The heat felt less intense. I was fading. And then, a miracle. Through the crushing silence and the roaring in my ears, I felt a pressure on my ankle. It wasn't the uniform pressure of the dirt. It was a focused, deliberate pressure. A grip. It was a hand. My brother's. In my own private hell, I had forgotten about them. While I was trapped, they had been fighting for me. They hadn't run for help. There was no time. They had thrown themselves at the mountain of dirt that had swallowed me, digging with a frantic, terrified strength only love can provide. Their hands were probably bloody, their nails torn, but they didn't stop. I felt the grip on my ankle tighten. Then, a slow, steady pull. The earth resisted, clinging to its prize, but the pull was stronger. I felt myself moving, an inch at a time, being dragged backward out of my tomb. The pressure on my chest began to lessen. The furnace heat began to cool. The red darkness began to give way to pinpricks of blinding, beautiful light. And then, I was out. I erupted from the earth, gasping and coughing, vomiting dirt and sucking in huge, glorious gulps of fresh, clean air. The world was impossibly bright, impossibly loud, and impossibly beautiful. I was lying on the ground, covered in dirt, my brothers staring down at me with faces white as ghosts, their own chests heaving with exertion and fear. We sat there for a long time, not saying a word. The unspoken agreement passed between us in that silence. We would never, ever tell our parents. The potential punishment, the worry we would cause it, was too immense to contemplate. Our grand adventure had nearly ended in the worst way imaginable, and the weight of that secret was almost as heavy as the dirt that had buried me. I went home that day, and my mom, seeing me caked in mud, did what moms do. She hosed me down in the backyard, scolding me lightly for getting so dirty. I stood there, the water washing the soil from my skin, feeling like a ghost. A secret survivor of a disaster no one else knew had happened. That experience left a mark on me that's still there, decades later. It taught me about the fragile line between a childhood adventure and a tragedy. It taught me about the bond between brothers, a bond forged in panic and sealed in silence. And it gave me a permanent, deep respect for the ground beneath my feet. It's not just dirt, it's a force, and on one summer day, it very nearly kept me forever.
Don't want to lose this channel and always be up to date with new videos? Then make sure to subscribe. The story continues, and it's only getting more interesting.